They cut down my trees while I was out of town, and for a second, I honestly thought I was standing in the wrong yard. I remember just sitting there in my truck, engine still running, staring straight ahead, like maybe if I blinked enough times those stumps would turn back into trees, like maybe I took a wrong turn somewhere and pulled into somebody else's place. But no, same crooked mailbox, same gravel drive, same old porch my dad built with his own hands, just without the wall of green that used to wrap around it like a quiet kind of protection. 30 years those trees had been there, tall sugar maples, straight as church steeples, planted by my grandfather back when this land was still more pasture than property line. I grew up under those trees. Summers meant shade so thick it felt 10 degrees cooler. Fall meant leaves piled high enough to disappear in. And at night, those trees kept the world out, muffled headlights, swallowed noise, made the place feel like ours. And now, it looked like somebody had shaved the land raw. I stepped out of the truck slow, like I was walking into something fragile, boots crunching over wood chips that weren't there a week ago. There were maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 stumps lined up along the edge of the property. Clean cuts. Professional. No storm damage. No accident. This was deliberate. That's when I saw the note. It was taped to one of the stumps, laminated like it was something official, something they expected me to respect. I walked over, peeled it off, and read it twice just to make sure I wasn't missing something. Removed per neighborhood improvement ordinance. Obstructing sightlines. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it didn't feel real yet. Sightlines. That word just kind of echoed in my head while I stood there holding that stupid piece of plastic. Sightlines to what, exactly? Because on my side, all those trees ever blocked was the glare of somebody else's porch lights and the hum of traffic that didn't used to be there. That's when it clicked. About 2 years back, they started building that subdivision right up against the far edge of my property. Used to be open land, rolling hills, nothing fancy, just space. Then one day survey flags showed up, then bulldozers, and before long it turned into one of those places with matching roofs, trimmed hedges, and those decorative rocks that look expensive but don't do a damn thing. They called it Silver Ridge Estates, which always sounded a little too proud for what it actually was. I never had much to do with them. We waved a couple times, sure. I'm not unfriendly. But it was clear pretty quick we lived different kinds of lives. Their yards were all manicured, symmetrical, everything in its place. Mine? Well, mine looked like someone actually lived there. Garden beds, tools leaning where I left them, a dog path worn into the grass. And those trees were the line between their world and mine. Where they were. I walked the boundary line slowly, trying to piece it together, and that's when I started noticing things that didn't sit right. Tire tracks, not just near the edge, but a good 10, maybe 15 feet into my property. Deep grooves, still fresh, probably from a skid loader or something heavy. They hadn't just cut the trees, they drove onto my land to do it. That tight feeling in my chest started turning into something sharper, something colder. And then I found it, half buried in the dirt near one of the stumps. A crumpled invoice, damp from the ground, but still readable. I picked it up, brushed it off, and there it was, the name of a local tree service company, date stamped just 3 days ago, and right at the top, clear as day, the billing address. Silver Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I stood there a long time after that, just holding that paper, feeling that slow burn settle in. Because this wasn't some misunderstanding, this wasn't a city mistake or a misread property line. This was a decision. Somebody over there looked at my trees, decided they didn't like them, and instead of knocking on my door, instead of having a conversation like a decent human being, they hired a crew and wiped them out like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I walked back up to the house eventually, sat down on the porch, and just looked out over what used to be shade. The sun hit different without those trees, harsher, more direct, like the place had lost its skin. I kept thinking about my grandfather, how he used to say those trees would outlive all of us if we took care of them. And for a long time, it felt like he was right. Turns out, he didn't account for neighbors. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point my eyes drifted past the stumps, past the property line, and over into their side. Their lawns were bright green, almost unnaturally so, like the kind of green you only get when water's never a concern. Kids were playing near a little playground set. There was a fountain running in the center, sunlight catching the spray just right. It looked comfortable, and that's when something shifted. Because I realized something they clearly hadn't. And the moment that thought settled in, that cold feeling in my chest turned into something else entirely. Not anger. Not exactly. Something quieter, more deliberate. The kind of feeling that doesn't rush, doesn't shout, just waits. They thought I'd take the loss, maybe file a complaint, argue with insurance, plant a few new trees and move on. They were wrong. Because what they took from me, that wasn't just wood and leaves. And what they built their little picture-perfect neighborhood on, well, they never really understood whose ground they were standing on. You ever have one of those moments where everything suddenly lines up, like pieces you didn't even realize you were holding just click together all at once? That was me, sitting on that porch, looking out past the stumps, past the broken line of what used to be mine, and straight into their backyard. Because here's the thing about land, real land, the kind that's been in a family longer than most people stay in a job. It carries history in ways paperwork doesn't always show. My dad used to say, "We don't just own this place, we understand it." And growing up, I didn't think much about what he meant. I just knew where the soil stayed damp longer after rain, which fence posts leaned in winter, which parts of the field needed extra care. But one thing he was always particular about, almost obsessive, really, was the water system. We had our own well, deep, reliable, older than most of the houses within 5 miles. And decades ago, before zoning got complicated and neighborhoods started popping up like weeds, my grandfather had installed an irrigation line that ran across the back stretch of the property. It was meant for pasture, keeping grass alive through dry summers, feeding livestock, that sort of thing. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. And over time, like a lot of things in rural areas, lines blurred a little. Land got sold, parcels got split, neighbors changed, and somewhere along the way, a handshake agreement got made. My dad never wrote it down, never saw the need. Someone from what would later become Silver Ridge asked if they could tap into the line for future development. Just temporary, they said. We'll work something out later. My dad, being who he was, just nodded and said, as long as it doesn't cause trouble. That was years ago. And now here I was, staring at a subdivision full of bright green lawns, a fountain that never seemed to run dry, and a playground built right over the path of that same old irrigation line. I actually stood up when it hit me, walked off the porch and down toward the edge of the property again, this time not looking at what was gone, but at what was still there. Because they hadn't just taken my trees. They'd been using my water. For years. No contract. No payments I ever saw. Just assumption. And maybe that would have been fine. Maybe I would have let it go the same way my dad did. Chalked it up to neighborly goodwill. But goodwill doesn't survive disrespect. Not like that. I remember walking out to the pump house just as the sun was starting to dip, that orange light hitting everything sideways, making the dust in the air look thicker than it was. It's a small structure. Nothing special, just concrete, a metal door that sticks in the summer, and a lock that's more about habit than security. I opened it up, stepped inside, and for a second, I just stood there listening. There's a sound those systems make when they're running right, a low, steady hum, almost like breathing. It's comforting, in a way. Familiar. That night, it felt different. I reached down, ran my hand along the main valve, old metal, worn smooth in spots from years of use, and I thought about those trees again. About the note. About the fact that not one person from that subdivision thought it was worth knocking on my door before sending in a crew. And that was it. No speech. No big decision moment. I just turned it. Slow at first, then all the way. The hum changed instantly, dropped off into something quieter, something hollow. I moved down the line, shutting off each valve feeding the direction of their property, one by one, methodical, almost calm. Then I opened the auxiliary drains, let the stored water bleed out, so there'd be no pressure left in the system. It took maybe 10 minutes total. 10 minutes to undo years of convenience they didn't even realize they depended on. I locked the pump house back up, walked to the edge of the property one more time, and looked out over Silver Ridge. Everything still looked the same. For now, I went inside, made myself some coffee even though it was too late for it, and sat at the kitchen table watching the light fade. There's a kind of quiet that settles in when you've made a decision you can't take back. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. I slept better than I expected that night. Day 1, nothing really changed. Their lawn still looked green, fountain still running, kids still playing like nothing had shifted under their feet. Day 2, you had to look a little closer. The grass didn't have that same shine to it. The edges near the walkways started dulling, just slightly. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed. I did. Day 3, it got harder to ignore. Patches started forming, uneven spots where the green broke apart into something more brittle. The fountain wasn't spraying as high, the water catching less light, falling shorter. And by day 4, well, that's when it started looking like truth. The grass had turned a tired shade of brown across most of the shared yard, dry enough in places that it crunched underfoot. The playground kicked up dust every time a kid ran across it, that soft, green cushion replaced by something harsher, something neglected. The fountain? Bone dry. Just a concrete bowl with a stain where water used to be. I was out by the fence that morning, fixing a loose board that didn't really need fixing, when I heard the first real argument drift over from their side. Voices carry differently when people are stressed, sharper, less filtered. Someone was blaming maintenance. Someone else was talking about a system failure. And another voice kept repeating, "This has never happened before." I leaned on the fence for a minute, listening, not smiling, not gloating, just taking it in. Because this wasn't random. This was consequence. It didn't take long after that. By that afternoon, I saw a woman I recognized from a distance walking straight toward my house with purpose. Fast steps, shoulders tight, the kind of walk people have when they've already decided they're right. Dana Whitaker, head of their HOA, if I remembered correctly. Late 40s maybe, always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be. I'd seen her once or twice during early construction, giving directions like she owned more than just her house. She didn't knock, just opened the gate, walked right up onto the porch like it was hers, and called out, "We need to talk." I took my time standing up from the chair, set my coffee down, and walked over to the door. "Morning," I said, calm as anything. "This isn't a good morning," she snapped. "Our water system is down. Entire back section. No irrigation, no fountain, nothing. And I'm being told your property is connected to the main line." I leaned against the doorframe, folded my arms a little. "Sounds inconvenient." Her eyes narrowed just enough to show she wasn't used to that kind of response. "You can't just cut off water to an entire neighborhood," she said, voice tightening. "There are shared agreements." "Are there?" I interrupted, not raising my voice, just placing the words carefully. Because I went through every document my dad left behind, didn't find much beyond a handshake. "That system has been in use for years," she shot back. "You don't get to just decide." "I didn't decide anything," I said. "I just stopped giving something away for free." That landed. You could see it in the way her posture shifted, just slightly, but enough. "This isn't how things are handled," she said, slower now, more controlled. "If there's a dispute, we resolve it properly." I nodded once, like I agreed. "You're right," I said. "We do." Then I stepped back inside for a second, grabbed a folder from the table, and came back out. Which is why I already started. I handed it to her. Property surveys, boundary lines, well, documentation, everything clear, everything dated. Her eyes moved faster as she flipped through it, that confidence starting to crack around the edges. This doesn't mean you can." "Oh, I'm not done," I said. And that's when I told her about the police report. About the arborist coming out to assess the value of the trees they cut. About the lawsuit I'd already filed, not just for damages, but for willful trespass. Triple damages, where I'm from. That's the kind of number people don't ignore. She just stood there for a second after that, quiet, processing, recalculating. "You're escalating this," she finally said. I shook my head a little. "No," I said. "You did." Dana didn't say much after that. She stood there on my porch, holding that folder like it weighed more than paper should, eyes scanning lines she probably wished weren't real, and for the first time since I'd ever seen her, she didn't look in control of anything. "You're making a mistake," she said finally, but it didn't come out sharp this time, more like something she was trying to convince herself of. I just shrugged a little, leaned back against the doorframe. "Maybe," I said, "but it won't be the first one made this week." She closed the folder, handed it back a little too quickly, like she didn't want to hold on to it any longer than she had to. "This isn't over," she added, already turning toward the steps. I nodded once. "No," I said. "It's not." And that was the last calm conversation we had. Because after that, things started unraveling faster than I think anyone over there expected. At first, they tried to handle it internally. I could tell. Trucks came in, guys in uniforms poking around their utility boxes, checking valves. digging small sections like maybe the problem was mechanical, something they could fix with enough effort and the right tools. But you can't fix a system that isn't yours. By the end of that week, the whole place looked tired. Not broken, not abandoned, just off. The lawns had gone from brown to brittle, patches turning into full stretches of dry, cracked ground. The playground kicked up clouds of dust every time a kid ran across it, and I noticed fewer and fewer parents letting their kids stay out there long. The fountain stayed empty. No water, no sound, just a hollow centerpiece that probably looked a lot better in the brochures than it did now. And then came the complaints. You could almost feel them before you heard them. Tension carries in a place like that. Doors closing harder than usual, voices raised just enough to travel, conversations stopping when someone walked by. People weren't just annoyed, they were confused. Because when you buy into something like Silver Ridge, you're not just buying a house, you're buying an idea. Clean, easy, taken care of. You don't expect to wake up one week and find out that the whole thing depends on a system sitting quietly on someone else's land, someone you never bothered to know. I saw Dana again a few days later, not on my porch this time. She was standing near the edge of their property with two other people. One of them I recognized as a lawyer type, suit too formal for the heat, holding a clipboard like it gave him authority. They didn't cross the line this time. That felt intentional. I walked out anyway, slow, hands in my pockets, stopping just short of where my land met theirs. Thought we might talk, Dana said, voice measured, like she'd practiced it. About the water? I asked. About resolution. The man next to her added quickly, stepping forward just a bit. There are ways to handle this that don't involve escalation. I almost smiled at that. Funny, I said. That word keeps coming up. Dana shot him a look, then turned back to me. We're willing to make this right, she said. Replant the trees, cover damages, formalize a usage agreement for the water system. Fair compensation, monthly rate, everything in writing. It sounded good. On paper, it probably was good. And for a second, I'll admit, I considered it. Not because I needed the money, but because it would have been easy, clean, the kind of ending people expect. But then I looked past them, at that stretch of dead grass, at the empty fountain, at the way the whole place seemed to sag under the weight of its own expectations, and I thought about how none of this would have happened if someone had just knocked on my door in the first place. Just once. I shook my head. No, I said. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. The lawyer blinked like he misheard me. I'm sorry. I said no. I repeated. You can replant whatever you want, won't bring those trees back. And as for the water, you're welcome to bring in trucks. Tank it in. Set up your own system. Do whatever you need to do. Dana's composure slipped for a second. That's not practical, she said. Do you have any idea what that would cost? I met her eyes. Probably less than what you're about to spend in court. That did it. You could feel the shift right there. That moment where negotiation stops being about compromise and starts becoming about damage control. They didn't argue much after that. Didn't threaten, didn't push, just gathered themselves up and walked away, quieter than they arrived. And from there, things got messy. The lawsuit moved faster than I expected. Turns out, cutting down trees on someone else's property without permission, especially mature ones with documented value, is the kind of mistake courts take seriously. The arborist report came back higher than I even guessed, not just for the trees themselves, but for age, replacement difficulty, loss of property value. Triple damages stacked on top of that. It added up quick. And the water situation? That turned into its own kind of spectacle. Because I meant what I said. I didn't turn it back on. Within a couple weeks, tanker trucks started showing up, big, loud things, hauling water in to keep at least part of the landscaping alive. It was expensive, inefficient, and impossible to hide. People notice when a luxury neighborhood needs deliveries just to keep their grass from turning to dust. And people talk. Local news picked it up after I sent in some drone footage. Nothing dramatic, just wide shots. Before and after. Green to brown. Flowing fountain to empty stone. They ran it as one of those community dispute segments, the kind that sounds neutral but lets the visuals do most of the talking. After that, it really started to hurt them. Homes that had been listed quietly started sitting longer. A couple price drops here and there. Then more. Turns out, sunset views don't sell quite as well when everything below them looks like it's been left out to dry. I'd see signs go up, then stay up. Families who had pushed for those trees to come down, suddenly packing boxes, loading trucks, moving on to somewhere that probably came with fewer complications. And me? I stayed right where I was. Stumps and all. I did have someone come out eventually. Talked about replanting. Maybe not maples this time. Maybe something that grows slower but stronger. Something that doesn't just look good, but lasts. Haven't decided yet. There's something about those empty spaces that still feels honest. Like a reminder. Because here's the part people always want to turn into a clean lesson. Something simple, something easy to agree on. Don't mess with other people's property. Sure, that's part of it. But it's not the whole thing. The truth is, none of this had to happen. Not the trees, not the lawsuit, not the dried up lawns, or the moving trucks, or the neighbors who probably still don't understand how it got this far. All it would have taken was a conversation, a knock on the door, a little respect. And that's the part that sticks with me, more than the money, more than the outcome. Because once that line gets crossed, once someone decides your space, your history, your boundaries don't matter, well, sometimes the only way people learn where the line is when something they depend on disappears. So I don't know. Maybe I went too far. Maybe I didn't go far enough. That's the kind of thing people love to argue about. And honestly, I'm curious where you land on it. Because if you were in my place, came home to find something like that, no warning, no respect, just gone, what would you have done? Would you have turned the water back on? Or let it all dry out the same way I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you want more stories like this, the kind where things don't always end clean, and people don't always agree on who's right, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because trust me, this wasn't the only time a quiet piece of land turned into something a whole lot louder.